The ache for quiet was a physical thing. A phantom limb where my old life used to be. After 30 years of orchestrated chaos, of managing logistics that made invasions look like parade planning, all I wanted was the symphony of cicadas and the rustle of wind through oak leaves. My wife, Helen, had dreamed of this place with me. A few acres on the edge of a subdivision, a sturdy old farmhouse, and a magnificent, dilapidated barn that smelled of hay and history. She was supposed to be here, tending her roses and laughing at my attempts to restore the ancient John Deere tractor slumbering within it. But cancer is a thief with no appreciation for dreams. So now, it was just me, the ghosts of our plans, and a deep, abiding need for peace. The subdivision was called Whispering Pines Estates, a name that promised the very tranquility I craved. The houses were immaculate, the lawns clipped to a uniform, submissive height. It was a world away from the dust of Kandahar or the chilling precision of a command center. I bought the property on the edge, the one that buffered the manicured perfection from the wilder fields beyond. It was a compromise. I got my barn and my space. The neighborhood got a buffer. Or so I thought. My introduction to the true nature of Whispering Pines came less than 48 hours after the moving truck pulled away. I was on a ladder, carefully sanding the peeling paint from a window frame, when a shadow fell over me. I looked down to see a woman who seemed to be constructed entirely of sharp angles and disapproval. She was in her late 50s, wearing a knife-creased white pantsuit that defied the humid September air. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a helmet of improbable stability, and her eyes, a pale, unforgiving blue, scanned my house as if assessing structural flaws in a hostile fortress. She held a clipboard like a weapon. "Good morning," I said, offering a neighborly smile. It felt foreign on my face. She did not return it. "I am Carol Covington," she announced, her voice as crisp as her trousers. "President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." "Alex Mercer," I replied, extending a hand. She eyed it, with its smudges of paint and ingrained dirt, as if I'd offered her a dead rodent. I slowly retracted it. "Mr. Mercer," she began, consulting her clipboard, "I'm here to welcome you to the community and to address a few discrepancies." Discrepancies. I was still getting my mail forwarded. I hadn't even fully unpacked. "Firstly, your mailbox." She pointed a lacquered nail toward the simple, sturdy black mailbox at the end of my driveway. It was the one that came with the house. Per Section 7, Subsection C, Paragraph 2 of the Whispering Pines Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, all mailboxes must be the evergreen traditional model in Hunter Green. Yours is non-compliant. I stared at the mailbox, then back at her. I must have misheard. "You're kidding, right?" Her lips thinned into a bloodless line. "The HOA does not kid. Mr. Mercer, we ensure community standards and protect property values. You have 14 days to rectify the issue before a $50 fine is levied. A second fine of $100 will be issued for every subsequent week of noncompliance." The sheer, unadulterated pettiness of it was breathtaking. In my old life, a discrepancy involved a missing shipping container of medical supplies or a miscalculated fuel load for a C-130. This was about the color of a box for junk mail. Still, I was here for peace. Peace meant not making waves. "Okay," I sighed, descending the ladder. "Hunter Green, got it. I'll pick one up this weekend." "Excellent," she said, making a prim checkmark on her sheet. She seemed disappointed by my immediate compliance. Her gaze then drifted to the barn. My sanctuary. My project. A flicker of something predatory crossed her face. "And that structure." The barn. It's one of the reasons I bought the place. It is an eyesore, she declared flatly. The paint is peeling, and its rustic aesthetic is incongruous with the established character of Whispering Pines. We will be discussing it at the next board meeting. You should expect a formal notice regarding its required upkeep and approved color palettes. Before I could formulate a response to the idea of a color palette for a 100-year-old barn, she turned on her heel. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said over her shoulder, the words dripping with insincere courtesy. I watched her march back across my lawn, her ramrod-straight posture, a testament to a will forged in the fires of trivial tyranny. I looked at my peaceful old house, at the magnificent barn that Helen had so adored, and felt the first cold whisper of a coming storm. The quiet I had sacrificed so much to find was already under siege. And the enemy, it seemed, wore a white pantsuit and carried a clipboard. The battle for Whispering Pines had begun, not with a bang, but with a bylaw. The first official notice arrived a week later, nestled amongst the bills in my non-compliant mailbox. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with the Whispering Pines HOA logo, a stylized pine tree that looked vaguely like a weapon. The letter, signed with Carol Covington's aggressively neat signature, detailed my transgressions. The mailbox, of course, but she had added more. My lawn, which I had mowed 2 days prior, was apparently a quarter-inch too high in several places, violating Section 9, the small, tasteful wind chime Helen had loved, a gift from our daughter, was an unapproved auditory decoration under Section 12, and the color of the stain on my back deck, a warm cedar I'd chosen for its natural look, was not on the pre-approved list of 3 shades of beige. Each violation came with its own 14-day compliance window and a schedule of escalating fines. I read the letter standing in my driveway, the sun warm on my face, and felt a familiar, cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I used to get right before a complex operation kicked off a quiet, analytical focus. This wasn't a neighborly dispute. This was a campaign. Carol wasn't just enforcing rules. She was probing my defenses, testing my tolerance, establishing a beachhead of control. My first instinct, born of years of conflict avoidance in my personal life, was to comply, peace at any price. So, I complied. That Saturday, I spent the morning at the hardware store. I bought the absurdly ornate, hunter green, evergreen traditional mailbox. It felt flimsy and ostentatious compared to my old one. I bought a can of Dull Dune deck stain, a color with all the personality of unflavored oatmeal. I spent the afternoon digging up the post for the old mailbox and cementing the new one in place, making sure it was perfectly level. I took down Helen's wind chime, the silence it left behind feeling heavier than its gentle music. The next day, I rented a power sander and stripped the deck, the scent of cedar replaced by the chemical odor of Dull Dune as I rolled on the soul-crushingly boring beige. I took pictures of it all before, during, and after, and emailed them to the HOA's official address, with a polite note confirming the rectifications. It felt like surrendering territory without a fight. For a few weeks, there was silence. I received a curt, one-line email confirming my compliance. I started working on the barn's interior, organizing old tools and drafting plans for a new workshop. I began the slow, methodical process of restoring the old John Deere 4020. It was a beautiful machine, a relic from an era of American industrial might. Taking apart the engine, cleaning each component, sourcing original parts, it was therapy. It was a problem I could solve with logic, patience, and the right tools. Unlike Carol Covington, the next attack was more insidious. It was early October, and the roses Helen had planted along the front walkway were in their last, defiant bloom of the season. They were her pride and joy. A variety called peace roses, with creamy white petals blushing to a delicate pink at the edges. I treasured them. One morning, I came out with my coffee to find them dying. The leaves were scorched brown. The magnificent blooms wilted and blackened as if touched by a sudden, toxic frost. The air had a faint, chemical bitterness to it. My heart seized. It was a violation far deeper than a mailbox or a deck stain. This was personal. This was an attack on her memory. I knelt, my knees sinking into the damp soil. The ground around the roots was unnaturally dark and wet. It wasn't a pest or a blight. I recognized the specific type of chemical burn. Someone had come in the night and deliberately poured a powerful herbicide, an industrial-grade weed killer, directly onto the roots of each bush. There was no direct proof it was Carol. It was the kind of thing that was impossible to prove. It was deniable sabotage, a classic psychological warfare tactic. Undermine morale, attack what the target values, create a sense of helplessness. I had seen it employed in far more dangerous theaters, but the principle was the same. She couldn't get me with the bylaws, so she had escalated. I spent the rest of the day carefully digging up the dead bushes, my hands raw and my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I took soil samples, sealed them in plastic bags, and labeled them with the date and time. Old habits die hard. Document everything. Assume nothing. The data might be useful later. I didn't know how, but my training screamed at me to maintain a chain of evidence. I saw her later that afternoon, driving by in her pristine white Lexus SUV. She slowed as she passed my house, her gaze lingering on the bare patch of earth where the roses had been. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. Her expression was one of placid, triumphant satisfaction. It was the look of a predator who had successfully wounded her prey and was waiting to see it bleed out. That look hardened my resolve. My desire for peace had been a worthy goal, but it was now clear that peace could not be achieved through appeasement. Appeasement only emboldens a bully. I had spent a career managing complex, hostile systems. Carol Covington and her HOA were just another system, a petty, dysfunctional one, but a system nonetheless. And all systems could be understood, analyzed, and, if necessary, dismantled. The next phase of Carol's campaign moved from my property to my reputation. Whispering Pines, like most modern suburban enclaves, had a private Facebook group. It was a digital town square filled with posts about lost dogs, recommendations for plumbers, and passive-aggressive complaints about people parking too close to the curb. I had joined it when I first moved in, hoping to get a feel for the community. I had mostly ignored it, but now, it became Carol's primary weapon. It started subtly. A post from Carol, draped in the language of neighborly concern. Just a friendly reminder to everyone to be mindful of our community's aesthetic standards. We all work so hard to keep our homes beautiful. And it's a shame when one or two properties don't uphold the same level of care. It affects everyone's property values. After all, community, first to read, protecting our investment. There was no name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I was the newcomer, the one with the old barn. The comments rolled in from her loyalists. "You're so right, Carol. Some people just don't seem to care. Thank you for all you do to keep this neighborhood wonderful. Carol. I saw a delivery truck at that house on the end last week. It left mud tracks on the asphalt. So inconsiderate." I watched it unfold from the sterile glow of my laptop screen, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. It was a masterclass in social isolation. She was painting me as an outsider, a threat to their collective, manicured existence. My attempts to be a quiet, unobtrusive neighbor were being twisted into a narrative of neglect and disrespect. The escalation came a week later. I had hired a local crew to replace the old, rotting slate roof on the barn. It was a necessary repair, a significant investment in preserving the structure. The crew was professional, quiet, and cleaned up meticulously at the end of each day. To Carol, this was an act of aggression. A new post appeared, this time with a photo. She had taken it from across the street, using a telephoto lens, judging by the compressed perspective. It was a picture of the two workmen on the roof, their faces mercifully blurred by the distance. Her caption read, "Does anyone know what's going on at the property on the end of Pine Ridge Lane? There have been strange men and loud noises coming from that old barn for days. I've seen them coming and going at all hours. As HOA president, I feel a responsibility for our community's safety and security. I'm just very concerned about the kind of element being brought into our quiet neighborhood." The implication was clear and venomous. She was framing a simple roof repair as some kind of clandestine, possibly criminal, enterprise. She was painting me as a harbinger of danger. The comments this time were more pointed. "I heard power tools late last night." A lie. The crew left at 5 p.m. every day. "My kids play on this street. This is very worrying. Someone should call the sheriff's department and have them check it out." My blood ran cold. She was moving beyond slander and into outright fabrication, inciting paranoia among my neighbors. This was no longer just about social pressure. She was trying to create a pretext for official intervention. That night, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the Washington, D.C. area code was familiar. "Mercer," I answered, my voice flat. "Alex, it's Marcus. Marcus Thorne, my former second-in-command. A man whose placid exterior hid a mind like a steel trap. We hadn't spoken in 6 months." "Marcus, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Just a routine flag. Your name popped up in a low-level municipal security scrape. A concerned citizen inquiry linked to your new address. Something about suspicious activity. You know the protocols. We have to check out any ping on a Tier 4 asset, even a retired one." My knuckles whitened on the receiver. She had actually done it. Someone, likely one of her cronies after reading that post, had called the sheriff's non-emergency line. "It's nothing. Marcus, it's a neighborhood dispute. An overzealous HOA president." There was a pause on the other end. "An HOA president?" Marcus sounded incredulous. "Alex, the last time your name got flagged, it was because of a misidentified diplomatic vehicle near the Iranian embassy. What the hell is going on over there?" "It's a long story. The short version is, I have a neighbor who seems to have mistaken herself for the warden of a suburban gulag." Marcus sighed. It was a sound I knew well. The sound of a man contemplating a mountain of unforeseen paperwork. "Look, I've already scrubbed the flag. It's clean. But you need to keep your head down. Alex, you know how it is. You're supposed to be enjoying your peace and quiet, not generating local law enforcement reports. The general was very clear about your sabbatical. Low profile, no ripples." The general? The mere mention of his name sent a chill down my spine. "I understand. Marcus, I'm handling it." "Is this handling it going to involve any specialized equipment or non-standard procurement orders?" he asked, a hint of gallows humor in his voice. "Negative," I said, though the thought of requisitioning a psychological operations unit to deal with Carol was briefly, tantalizingly appealing. "Civilian methods only. Consider the situation contained." "All right, just be careful. People in those little communities can be crazy." "You have no idea," I said, and hung up the phone. I stood in the silence of my kitchen, the conversation replaying in my mind. Carol's little social media game had just tripped a wire connected to the highest levels of national security. She was a fly, buzzing around a hornet's nest, completely oblivious to the danger. The call from Marcus was a stark reminder of the world I had left behind, and the resources I could, if pushed, theoretically access. My desire for peace was still the primary objective, but my definition of handling it was beginning to shift. This was no longer just about defending my property. This was about operational security, and Carol Covington had just become a threat to it. The campaign had to be neutralized. Having failed to isolate me socially or intimidate me with minor property damage, Carol escalated to her next logical step, weaponizing the full bureaucratic might of municipal government. Her HOA bylaws were a cudgel, but city ordinances were a guillotine. She clearly believed that a man with an old barn and a desire for privacy must be hiding something, and she was determined to use the authorities to find it. The first salvo came in the form of a large, fluorescent orange sticker slapped onto the brand-new roof of my barn. It was a stop work order from the County Code Enforcement Office. I was standing on a scaffold, meticulously repairing a window frame, when a county truck pulled into my driveway. A harried-looking man in a polo shirt with a county seal on it trudged across the lawn, an expression of weary resignation on his face. "Alex Mercer," he asked, not waiting for an answer. "I'm Dave from Code Enforcement. We've received a complaint about an unpermitted major structural modification on this outbuilding." He gestured vaguely at the barn. I looked at the new roof, then at him. "It's a roof replacement," I said calmly. "The old one was leaking. It's a repair, not a modification." "According to the complainant," he said, consulting his tablet with a sigh, "you're altering the foundational structure and adding a second floor without a permit. The report mentions extensive construction, heavy machinery, and a complete disregard for setback requirements." He read the last part with a hint of an eye roll. Carol's words, almost verbatim from her Facebook screed. "There's no second floor being added," I said, keeping my voice even. "The only heavy machinery was the lift truck the roofers used for the shingles, and the barn has been in this exact spot since 1923. I have the original survey maps. It predates this entire subdivision, not to mention its setback requirements." Dave, the code inspector, actually looked relieved. He was a man caught in the crossfire of a war he didn't sign up for. "Look, Mr. Mercer, 90% of my calls are anonymous complaints that turn out to be neighbor disputes. I have to follow up. Can I take a look inside?" "Of course," I said, leading him into the vast, open space of the barn. The air smelled of old wood and new shingles. Sunbeams lanced through the high windows, illuminating floating dust motes. My tools were neatly organized on pegboards. In the center of the floor sat the partially disassembled John Deere 4020, its components laid out on tarps with surgical precision. Dave looked around, his eyes taking in the soaring height of the ceiling. "Yeah," he said, shaking his head. "No second floor here, sir. You have any idea how much paperwork I have to file for a bogus complaint like this?" "I have an idea who filed it," I said grimly. "Let me guess. HOA president lady named Carol?" I raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" Dave let out a short, bitter laugh. "Know her. We have a folder for her at the office. It's thicker than the county budget. She calls about everything: grass height, unapproved garden gnomes, the aggressive color of someone's welcome mat. Last month, she tried to have a family's backyard swing set condemned as an unregulated amusement structure. She's prolific." It was a small vindication, but a welcome one. I wasn't her only target. I was just her latest obsession. "Well," Dave said, snapping a few pictures with his tablet for the official record, "everything looks fine here. The roof is clearly a repair. Exempt from a structural permit. The building is sound. I'll get this stop work order voided and file my report. You'll probably get a formal letter in a week or so clearing you." He looked at the tractor. "That's a 4020, isn't it, classic? My grandpa had one on his farm." "Restoring it is my retirement project," I said. "She's a beaut. Well, sorry to bother you, Mr. Mercer, and good luck." He shook my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the battle I was facing. The second official visit came a week later. This time, it was animal control. The complaint, I was informed by another long-suffering public servant, was that I was harboring a large, potentially dangerous and unlicensed animal in my barn. The officer, a young woman with a kind face and tired eyes, looked at me, then at the barn, then back at me. "Let me guess," she said. "You're not, in fact, running an illegal tiger sanctuary." "Not today," I replied. "You're welcome to check." I opened the large barn doors. She peered inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom and landing squarely on the John Deere. She stared at it for a long moment. "The complaint mentions loud roaring sounds at all hours of the night, and that you were seen dragging a large metal cage into the building." I pointed at the engine block, currently suspended from a chain hoist. "I fire up the engine sometimes to test it. It's a 6-cylinder diesel. It can be loud." I then pointed to the heavy-duty steel frame I had welded to move the engine block around. "And that's my metal cage." The officer switched off her flashlight and rubbed her temples. "Carol Covington?" she asked. "The one and only." "Okay," she sighed. "Report will be marked unfounded. Have a nice day. Sir, try to keep your roaring tractor to a minimum." Each visit was a disruption. Each required me to stop my work, explain the situation, and endure the polite but weary scrutiny of an official just doing their job. Carol was using the system as a form of harassment by proxy. It was inefficient, but it was relentless. She was trying to wear me down, to bury me in a flurry of frivolous bureaucratic actions. She was hoping to catch me on a technicality, any tiny infraction that she could then blow up into a major issue. The problem for her was that I was a man who had built a career on understanding and navigating complex systems. Bureaucracy didn't intimidate me. It was a terrain I knew well. For every complaint she filed, I created a corresponding file. I logged the date, the time, the name of the official, and the outcome. I made formal requests under the Freedom of Information Act for the text of the anonymous complaints, which I knew she was filing. The language was always hers, melodramatic, full of buzzwords like safety and community standards. My file on Carol Covington was growing thicker than her file at the county office. It was a dossier of harassment, a meticulously documented campaign of targeted abuse. I didn't know yet how I would use it, but I knew its value. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Carol was expending a tremendous amount of energy trying to create a problem for me. Soon, all that energy was going to come rocketing back at her. The final escalation, the act that severed my last thread of patience, was a direct and malicious assault on my life's work. It was an attack on my past, my present, and my carefully constructed, peaceful future. Carol, in her relentless digging, must have found some old public record, some breadcrumb that linked my name to one of my former coverages, a high-level logistics consulting firm that contracted exclusively with the Department of Defense. To her, it must have looked like a normal corporate job, a pressure point. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in the barn, calibrating the fuel injection pump on the John Deere. my hands stained with grease, but my mind blissfully at peace. My phone rang. Displaying the restricted number that I knew meant it was a call I had to take. I wiped my hands and answered, "Mercer." It was General Vance's executive aide, a woman whose voice could freeze water. "Mr. Mercer, please hold for the general." A moment later, the general's voice, gravelly and devoid of any warmth, came on the line. "Alex, we have a situation." General Vance did not use words like situation lightly. A situation for him usually involved a failed state or a missing nuclear submarine. "Sir," I said, my body going rigid with an old, conditioned response to his authority. At 0900 hours this morning, my office received a phone call from a civilian, a woman named Carol Covington. Ice flooded my veins. She identified herself as the president of your homeowners association. The general continued, his voice flat and cold as a slab of granite. She informed my aide that she was calling to report a highly unstable and disruptive employee. She claimed that you were exhibiting antisocial behavior, engaging in threatening conduct, and that our firm should be aware that we had a potential workplace violence incident on our hands. She suggested we should terminate your contract before you became a liability to our corporate reputation. I was speechless. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was stunning. She had found the most sensitive, most dangerous hornet's nest in my entire life, and had not just poked it with a stick, but tried to set it on fire. "Sir, I can explain." "I don't need an explanation. Alex." He cut me off. "I need to know if you are compromised. Is this woman a threat? Has she been on your property? Has she had access to any of your materials?" "No, sir. Absolutely not. This is a civilian matter, a personal harassment campaign. She has no knowledge of anything to her. I'm just a problematic neighbor who works for one of your public-facing consulting shells." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear the faint, secure hum of his office. He was thinking. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "This is unacceptable. Your sabbatical was authorized at the highest level to ensure your stability and well-being after the Afghanistan drawdown and Helen's passing. It is a matter of national security that you remain tranquil. This woman, this amateur, has just made a nuisance of herself on a level that requires a response. She tried to interfere with a protected federal asset. My asset. Sir, with all due respect, let me handle it," I said, my own voice now hard. "It's a local problem. It needs a local solution." I could feel the general considering my words. He knew me. He knew my record. He knew that when I said I would handle something, it was handled. "What is your intended course of action?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for a mission plan. "She has created a hostile environment through a systematic abuse of rules and a campaign of harassment," I said, the words coming out as a calm, clear, tactical assessment. "She believes her power is absolute within her small sphere of influence. The solution is to demonstrate to her, in a very public and undeniable way, that her power is a fiction and that there are forces at play she cannot possibly comprehend." "Be more specific, Alex." "She values status, appearances, and the illusion of control above all else. I am going to take all three of those things away from her. The action will be decisive, proportional, and executed with minimal collateral damage." Another pause. The general was weighing risk. "No loose ends, Alex. No blowback on this office. Your official status remains retired. Our involvement remains zero. Understood?" "Crystal clear, sir." Very well. Handle it. And Alex, he added, a fraction of a degree warmer. I was sorry to hear about the roses. Helen was a fine woman. He hung up. I stood there in the quiet of my barn, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about mailboxes or deck stain. Carol Covington had reached into my past, into a world she couldn't imagine, and tried to burn it all down to win a suburban squabble. She thought she was calling a manager to complain about a difficult employee. She had no idea she had just dialed the Pentagon and threatened one of its most valuable and most heavily protected secrets. I looked at the massive, powerful form of the John Deere 4020. The restoration was complete. The engine, a 6.2-liter diesel powerhouse, was purring like a lion. The hydraulic system was fully charged. It was a beautiful tool, designed for peaceful, productive work. But a tool is only as good as the intention of its user. My intentions were no longer peaceful. Carol Covington had sowed the wind. Now, she was going to reap the whirlwind, and I was going to drive it. The opportunity presented itself 3 days later. It was a Saturday morning, bright and clear. I had an important meeting scheduled. General Vance had been true to his word. There would be no official blowback. But there were now transitional protocols I needed to attend to at a secure facility an hour's drive away. Failure to appear was not an option. I put on a decent suit, grabbed my briefcase, a heavy-duty Pelican case that contained nothing more interesting than a laptop and some files, and headed for the barn where I kept my car. And there it was, parked directly in front of the massive, sliding barn doors, blocking them completely. A brand-new Bentley Bentayga, a behemoth of an SUV, gleaming in a shade of pearlescent white so bright it hurt the eyes. It was parked less than a foot from the doors, making it impossible to slide them open more than a few inches. There was no way to get my car out. There was no way to get the tractor out. It was a perfect, arrogant blockade. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a folded piece of cream-colored cardstock, an official HOA notice. I walked over and pulled it out. The note, written in Carol's flawless, looping cursive, read, Mr. Mercer. This vehicle is temporarily parked here, as it is the only level ground suitable for the application of a new ceramic coating. Per HOA bylaws. Section 14, Paragraph F. Any vehicle undergoing maintenance must not be parked on the street for more than 2 hours. Unfortunately, this process can take up to 24 hours to cure properly. The vehicle cannot be moved until then. I trust you will understand the need to adhere to our community's regulations. Sincerely, Carol Covington, HOA President. It was a declaration of total victory. She had me pinned. She knew I had somewhere to be. She'd likely seen me getting ready. She had used her own twisted interpretation of the bylaws to imprison me on my own property, using her $250,000 symbol of status as the bars of my cage. I looked toward her house. There she was, a silhouette in her living room window, a coffee cup raised to her lips, watching me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to call, to beg, to rage, to be powerless. I felt nothing. The anger, the frustration, it had all burned away, leaving behind a crystalline, cold certainty. The campaign was over. It was time for the decisive action. I turned my back on the Bentley and walked back to the small side door of the barn. Slipping inside, the cavernous space was cool and quiet. My car sat there, inaccessible, but next to it sat the solution. The John Deere 4020. I had spent months restoring it. Every hose was new, every fluid fresh. The diesel engine was tuned to perfection. The tires, nearly as tall as I was, were fully inflated. Its front end was equipped with a heavy-duty loader bucket, forged from half-inch thick American steel. It was a machine built to move the earth. Moving a British SUV would be child's play. I walked to my workbench and picked up a small, discreet security camera, the kind used for wildlife observation. I had several. I quickly mounted it on a high beam, its lens aimed squarely at the barn doors and the gleaming white Bentley. I activated it with my phone. Documentation is key. Then I climbed up into the high operator's seat of the tractor. The seat groaned under my weight. The air smelled of diesel, grease, and raw power. I turned the key. The engine hesitated for a second, then roared to life with a deafening, throaty bellow that shook the entire barn. The polished chrome exhaust pipe, sticking straight up like a smokestack, belched a puff of black smoke. The sound was glorious. It was the sound of inevitability. I could see Carol through the dusty barn window. Her silhouette stiffened. The coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. I engaged the hydraulics. The loader arms on the front of the tractor rose with a powerful hiss. I pushed the throttle forward. The engine's roar deepened. The entire barn vibrated with contained energy. I put the tractor in its lowest gear, the creeper gear, designed for maximum torque. Slowly, deliberately, I drove toward the barn doors. The gap was too narrow to get through. That wasn't a problem. I wasn't going through the doors. With a thunderous crash of splintering wood and screaming metal, the John Deere punched its way through the wall of the barn itself. Right next to the blocked doors, timbers shattered. Siding exploded outwards. The tractor emerged into the sunlight like a great green beast, shaking itself free from its cage. I had just destroyed a section of my own barn. It was a necessary and strangely liberating act. Collateral damage, acceptable losses. I was now in my side yard, parallel to the driveway. Carol was no longer in the window. She was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, her phone in her hand, her face a mask of utter disbelief and horror. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. This was not in her playbook. I swung the tractor around in a wide, powerful arc, the deep treads of the rear tires chewing up my lawn. I didn't care. It was my lawn. I could fix it later. I lined the tractor up, facing the Bentley head-on. The steel loader bucket loomed over the SUV's ridiculously oversized grille. I saw neighbors emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Phones were coming out. Good. The more witnesses, the better. I drove forward, slowly. The noise of the diesel engine was the only sound in the world. Carol was shouting something, but her words were lost in the mechanical symphony. The front tires of the tractor nudged the Bentley's bumper. The SUV's alarm began to shriek, a useless, hysterical cry against the roar of the engine. I did not stop. With a steady, irresistible pressure, I pushed the Bentley down my driveway. Its tires screeched in protest against the asphalt, leaving long, black streaks. But it was no match for the nearly 5 tons of raw, American-made torque. I pushed it out of my driveway and into the middle of the street. Pine Ridge Lane. I stopped the tractor. The Bentley's alarm continued its pathetic wail. Carol was now running toward me, her face contorted in a mask of fury. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "That's a brand new Bentley. Are you insane?" I looked down at her from my perch on the tractor's seat. I didn't say a word. I simply engaged the hydraulics again. The massive steel loader bucket descended. Carol's eyes widened in comprehension and terror. "No, no!" The bucket made contact with the Bentley's hood, with a sickening crunch of deforming aluminum. I didn't stop. I kept pushing the hydraulic lever. The front suspension of the multi-ton tractor lifted slightly, as the powerful hydraulic rams forced the bucket downwards. The Bentley's hood crumpled like a discarded soda can. The windshield spiderwebbed, then imploded with a loud, percussive pop. The engine block was being crushed, shoved down into the chassis. The alarm finally sputtered and died as the electrical system was obliterated. I continued to apply pressure until the front half of the $250,000 SUV was a grotesque, flattened wreck of metal and glass. Fluids oil, coolant, washer fluid began to pool on the asphalt beneath it. I then raised the bucket, disengaged the hydraulics, and throttled the engine down to a low, rumbling idle. The sudden, relative silence was deafening. Every eye in Whispering Pines Estates was on us. Carol stared at the mangled heap that was once her pride and joy, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish pulled from water. Her ultimate symbol of status and power had been casually, contemptuously destroyed by a 50-year-old piece of farm equipment. The sound of sirens grew in the distance. Someone had called the police. Of course they had. It was all part of the plan. I calmly switched off the tractor's engine. I climbed down from the seat, my suit trousers surprisingly clean. I walked over to the speechless Carol, stopping a few feet away. "You blocked my driveway," I said, my voice calm and even. "I had a meeting I couldn't miss, so I moved your car." Just then, two sheriff's department cruisers screeched to a halt at the end of the block, their lights flashing behind them. However, two sleek, black, unmarked sedans with government plates pulled up silently, boxing them in. The deputies got out, hands on their sidearms, their faces grim. But before they could take a step, the doors of the black sedans opened. 4 men in dark suits emerged, all with the same telltale haircut and impassive expressions of federal agents. The passenger door of the lead car opened, and out stepped General Vance. He was in his late 60s, ramrod straight, wearing a tailored civilian suit that did nothing to hide his military bearing. He surveyed the scene: the crushed Bentley, the massive tractor, the stunned neighbors, the confused deputies with an eye that had assessed battlefields across the globe. His gaze was cold, analytical, and radiated an authority that made the local law enforcement officers freeze in place. He strode past the deputies as if they were statues, his eyes locking onto Carol. She flinched as his gaze swept over her. He stopped beside me. "Alex," he said, his voice a low command. "Report." "The asset is secure, sir," I replied, holding up my briefcase. "The obstruction has been removed. There was some collateral damage, but the objective was achieved." The general nodded curtly. He then turned his full attention to Carol, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. The lead deputy finally found his voice and took a tentative step forward. "Sir, I'm Deputy Miller with the County Sheriff's Office. What exactly is going on here?" General Vance didn't even look at him. He pulled a wallet from his jacket, flipped it open to reveal credentials that made the deputy's eyes go wide, and snapped it shut. "This is a federal matter. Deputy, your jurisdiction ends here. Secure the perimeter and do not let anyone leave." The deputy, utterly outranked and outclassed, could only nod and stammer. Yes, sir." He began directing his partner to tape off the street. Vance then took 2 steps toward Carol. He spoke in a low, conversational tone, yet it carried across the silent street with chilling clarity. "Mrs. Covington, my name is General Thomas Vance. I am a deputy director with the Department of Defense. For the last 6 months, you have been engaged in a systematic and escalating campaign of harassment against a protected federal contractor, Mr. Alex Mercer, a man whose peace and quiet is, for reasons you will never understand, a matter of national security." Carol's face had gone from red with rage to a pasty, sickly white. She was trembling. "You have vandalized his property," the general continued, his voice a relentless, factual drone. "You have slandered him. You have filed false reports with local authorities, wasting taxpayer money and official resources. And, this morning, you made a threatening phone call to my office, a secure Pentagon line, in an attempt to jeopardize his livelihood. And finally, you used your vehicle to illegally detain a federal asset, interfering with his official duties. That car," he gestured dismissively at the wreck, "is now evidence in a federal investigation against you. I do hope it was insured, though I doubt your policy covers destruction resulting from an act of domestic terrorism." The words domestic terrorism hung in the air, sucking all the remaining oxygen out of the street. Carol made a small, choking sound. "Mr. Mercer's response," the general said, gesturing to the tractor, "while unorthodox, was a necessary and, frankly, quite efficient countermeasure to neutralize a direct threat. That tractor, by the way, is currently under a DoD contract for a rural infrastructure stress test project. By blocking it, you weren't just blocking his car, you were interfering with United States government property." He let that sink in. The trap wasn't just sprung, it had snapped shut with the force of a collapsing star. "You wanted to know what was going on in his barn, Mrs. Covington," the general said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "You have no idea how lucky you are that all he was doing was fixing a tractor." He turned to one of his agents. "Take her statement. Then inform her that her new Bentley has been impounded as evidence, and that she can expect to be contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Mr. Mercer," he said, turning to me. "You're late for your meeting." He nodded toward the waiting black sedan. "Let's go." I picked up my briefcase, gave one last look at the utter ruin of Carol Covington's world, and walked to the car. The power dynamic had not just been flipped, it had been vaporized. She had brought the full force of her petty tyranny to bear, and I had responded with a force she never knew existed. The aftermath was swift and total. Carol Covington's reign over Whispering Pines didn't just end. It was surgically excised. The legal fallout was, as General Vance had promised, handled at the federal level, while the domestic terrorism charge was hyperbole designed for maximum psychological impact. The charge of interfering with a federal contractor was very real, faced with the prospect of a legal battle against the bottomless resources of the Department of Justice. Carol crumbled. She pleaded down to a lesser charge, but the consequences were severe. She received a massive fine that likely consumed a significant portion of her husband's wealth, a lengthy probation, and, most importantly, a permanent federal restraining order that prohibited her from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Her insurance company, upon learning from the police report that she had deliberately and illegally used her vehicle to block my property, denied her claim for the destroyed Bentley on the grounds of fraudulent and criminal action. She was left with nothing but a $250,000 pile of scrap metal, and the bill for its removal and the street cleanup. The social consequences were even more devastating for a woman like Carol. The story, complete with cell phone videos of the tractor versus Bentley incident, became a local legend. The arrival of the black cars and men in suits elevated it from a crazy neighbor dispute to something far more mysterious and compelling. She was exposed not as a powerful community leader, but as a foolish bully who had picked a fight with a sleeping giant. Her authority on the HOA board evaporated overnight. Her loyalists, seeing her so thoroughly and publicly humiliated, abandoned her instantly. An emergency HOA meeting was called, from which she was barred due to the restraining order. She was voted out as president in a unanimous decision. Her husband, a man who valued his public image above all else, was mortified by the scandal. He filed for divorce within the month. They sold their house at a loss and disappeared from the community. A new HOA board was elected, comprised of reasonable people who were tired of the petty tyranny. They immediately went through the bylaws, striking out the most ridiculous and oppressive rules. The approved color palettes were abolished. The mailbox regulation was rescinded. A new era of live and let live descended upon Whispering Pines. The neighborhood took a collective breath of fresh air. People started planting flowers they actually liked. Someone even put up a pink plastic flamingo, an act that would have previously triggered a Category 5 hurricane from Carol. Now, people just smiled. As for me, I finally found the peace I had been seeking. I repaired the wall of my barn, leaving the new wood unpainted as a quiet statement. The tractor went back to its intended purpose of maintaining the property and being a therapeutic hobby. The neighbors treated me with a new, profound respect, mixed with a healthy dose of awe and a wide berth. They would wave politely, but no one ever dropped by unannounced. I had become the quiet, mysterious man at the end of the street, and that suited me perfectly. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit on my back deck, still stained a warm, non-compliant cedar, and I look out over the fields. I listen to the cicadas and the whisper of the wind through the pines. The memory of Helen feels closer in these quiet moments. Her peace roses are gone, but I planted a new garden in their place. This time, I chose a hardy, resilient variety of rose. They're called Independence.